Welcome to Prepper Nation. I'm John, obviously. Thank you very much for being here this morning. We're going to have a quick discussion about food. It's pretty important, right? It's one of the things we need, son, in order to survive. So this comes from an article. I'm going to give you the title of the article first. It is From Trucker Boycotts to Grid Down. There's only one way to survive a food crisis. This was written by Brandon Smith over at Prepper Beef. It's a fairly new blog to me. I just discovered it and I thought it was a really good article, although I disagree with that title. And I'll explain why again. From trucker boycotts to grid down. Very important stuff, right? There's only one way to survive a food crisis. And I think that's incorrect. I disagree with that particular statement. I think there are many different ways to survive a food crisis. But again, I thought it was a really good article. So let's dive into it. So rather than one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to list off three different ways that preppers can survive a food crisis. There are probably more than three. So if I don't hit one and it's on your mind, drop it in the comments, drop it in chat, whatever the case may be. But again, I thought this was a really good article because they're talking about the trucker boycotts, which I've already said I think we're going to see more and more of as we lead up to November and beyond, especially if things don't work out for Donald Trump. And also grid down, which I do think we're going to see more and more of because we're already a tech-driven society, a tech-dependent society. But AI has been implemented so quickly now, and it's kind of piggybacking on this idea that everything has to be electric in order to save the planet. And so I don't know how to explain it. It's like at this point we're plugging into the matrix, and the quickest way to hurt a population or an enemy or something is to go after the grid. That's the future of warfare, in my opinion. So the first and the most obvious is homesteading. All right, so let's have a quick discussion about homesteading. Again, the most obvious choice here. I think a lot of people in chat, I guarantee you, but also a lot of people in the prepping community in general, even if they've never heard of this channel, which is not surprising the way the algorithm works. But if you see them in another community, they'll be talking about homesteading, talking about how homesteading should be the end goal. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I do think there's some disadvantages to it. So the advantages are obvious. You own your own grocery store. If you're homesteading the right way, you don't have to rush out to Food Line or Food City, or Walmart grocery, or God forbid the Target grocery section, right? And buy stuff up. You don't have to do that because you're producing. You know what I mean? You got fruit trees. You've got goats running around and chickens and all this stuff. You've got a massive garden probably if you're homesteading this sort of stuff. But we also need to understand the disadvantages, okay? Where do desperate people who are very hungry go? What do they hit first when they're ransacking places? Grocery stores. And if you're a homesteader, and the idea of homesteading is that you are your own grocery store, that's awesome. But when things begin to go south and you have thousands or even millions of people vacating cities because there's no food left, if we had a total collapse like a Mad Max, they don't care whether there is a Piggly Wiggly sign hanging up or if there's a no trespassing sign hanging up. They truly don't care. If they see food, they're going after it. And so this puts a big, big target on you. And I got to give a shout out to Hutch. Hutch out there, brother, if you're hearing this, he put out I think it was a community post earlier this week. And man, it makes total sense. You have people that put all of their eggs into one basket, and that's not a pun intended, I promise. But they're total homesteaders. I'm never leaving my castle. I'm never leaving the fort. I'm never leaving the property. This is my property. And Hutch put out a community post, and he pointed to the wildfires that are taking place in Texas. And, I don't know how bad they are now, but when these things were kind of peaking. They may still be peaking. They were evacuating entire towns all in one swoop. Now, seriously, tell me they're vacating and evacuating an entire town, and you mean to tell me there's not one prepper in that entire town? I find that hard to believe. There's some homesteaders in there that are about to lose everything or have lost everything at this point, and homesteading was literally their only plan. So it doesn't just mean a golden horde is rushing to your property. It can be something like a wildfire, and I thought it was an excellent community post by Hutch. But listen, if people want what you have, and they know that you're strapped and they know they're not going to be able to come take it by force, they're not just going to let you have it and move along. Wildfires, they can be created by men or women, if you will. They can run you off your property, smoke you out. So, again, not necessarily an easy target, but a huge target, especially the bigger the homestead is. So anyway, moving on. Before we do, if you don't mind, hit like, hit subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. A lot of new faces over here. I appreciate y'all, and I appreciate the long-term folks as well. Y'all OGs, the usual suspects as we call them. So moving on to the second group, stackers, right? You'll hear this in chat as well. And I've seen this, people will be in chat and they're pushing. When somebody's talking about stacking food, they're like, you need to grow food. You need to become a homesteader. And again, that's a great end goal, but it's not viable for everybody. This group exists too, people that are just stacking, and they'll go out and they'll stack a year or two maybe of survival food, or they'll stack 6 months of MREs if they can afford to do it. They have extensive pantries. Maybe they have a little bit of survival food and a lot of canned food and stuff like this, powdered milk, but there are disadvantages to everything. And as a stacker, the obvious disadvantage here is the moment you pull from your stack, you're on the clock. If you're ever in a situation where you got to start using preps, I mean, a year's worth is a lot of food. Let's be honest, especially if you've got like a family of 4 and you've got a year's worth for everybody. But that first day, when you're pulling off of that stack, again, now you're on the clock. It's only going to dwindle at this point because you're not producing. And at that point, if it's that bad, you don't have the ability to resupply, because you're pulling off of it for a reason. This method also requires a lot more water than most people realize. This is something I've seen with the stacker crowd that rarely ever gets talked about. MREs are a different beast. They pretty much all in one. It's a one and done experience, right? Except a little bit of trash left over. But with survival food, or people that are stacking extensive amounts of beans and rice and things, mylar and stuff like this, nobody ever talks about the water. Nobody ever talks about how much water it takes to turn, a little bag of Insta oats, right, out of the Ready Wise, because there's so much oats and stuff in there, or potatoes, into something that you can actually eat. Nobody talks about how much water it takes to take a bag of dry beans and get it to the point where it's edible and you don't hate yourself later. You know what I'm saying? Nobody ever talks about the water. So it takes an insane amount of water, and you're going to run out of room very quickly, unless you just have a huge house, right? A year's worth of survival food and enough water to make that happen for an entire year, man, that's a lot of room. And people, I think they get into it and they don't understand this. And then you get into, especially with the extensive pantries, not so much with the survival food. You got to rotate the stuff, folks, and it's no fun. It's no fun going in once a month or so and rotating cans, rotating food, kind of taking inventory. It takes time. It really does. And I think the third group out there, and here's the beautiful part, you already know which group you fall into, right? And again, there might be more than three. The third group are the preservers. These are the folks that they love to can. They love to pressure can. They love to water bath can. They love to Mylar, perhaps. They love to use the smaller dehydrators and make up a bunch of jerky. They like making hardtack. Maybe they even have a freeze dryer. I know some folks out there do, not probably not a lot because they're very expensive. Um, the advantage here is it cuts down on waste. You're paying more up front. That's a disadvantage. But then once you have the stuff that you need, once you have the canning equipment, once you have the jars and the lids and things like this, once you have that Harvest Right freezer or a bunch of Mylar bags and buckets and stuff, then you begin to save money because you're prolonging the life of the food. I mean, some people that have the freeze dryers, man, they'll just cook up a nice dinner and then freeze dry the leftovers. That's pretty common with people that have freeze dryers. And so again, you're paying thousands of dollars up front in most cases, but you're saving money on the back end. But let's be honest, this group, it also takes up a lot of space. If you're canning and you're doing it right, we began to run out of cupboard space pretty quick. Pretty quick. We were redoing because we got top covers and then we got bottom ones, and we started shuffling stuff around, and eventually, we did the bottom ones out with canned jams and jellies and pickles and stuff like this. But it takes up room, takes up space. But it is something my wife especially loves to do. There was a learning curve, and that's, you know, I guess with homesteading, there's a huge learning curve too, right? But there's a learning curve when it comes to preserving stuff. And with this one, another disadvantage I think is it's going to be harder to remain gray. Meaning, if you have a harvest right, or you're canning and you have, 500 jars, and some of y'all do, I know, I've seen them. It's kind of hard to conceal that. When you have friends or when you have extended family coming over, or maybe you're having some work done inside your home, it's hard to hide a harvest right. It kind of sticks out. You know what I mean? It doesn't look like a dishwasher. It doesn't look like a stove. So it is harder to remain gray, I think. Um, so getting back to the article, no, I don't agree that there's only one way of doing things. And I also don't believe there's a best way of doing things. Some people will tell you this is the best way. Homesteaders will tell you homesteading's the best way. You need to be homesteading, otherwise you're not going to make it. Right? They'll tell you this. The preserving crowd, they'll tell you you got to learn how to preserve food, otherwise you're not going to make it. This is the best way. And I think that's both right and wrong. I think it's the best way for that individual, but it may not necessarily be the best way for you. Imagine trying to homestead, but you live in a studio apartment in Portland, just to pull that out of thin air. How are you going to homestead in a studio apartment? Right? At the same time, how can you stack a year's worth of food and water if you're living with a relative or something like this? So everybody has their own individual situation. And you got to take a serious and honest look at your situation, your budget. How much space do I have? How can I conceal this stuff? And then you have to decide which method is best for you. Um, you know, I think the most important thing here is that you're doing something. You're not just sitting around. I say this sometimes in the videos. You're sitting there with 2 days worth of food, right? You don't want to be that person. You want to be doing something. I think that's more important than trying to do what's perfect, right? Again, think about what you can afford, how much free space do you have, and what do you enjoy doing? Honestly, the concept of homesteading is awesome, but I don't want to chase chickens around all day. I don't have 6 hours a day to plant and to go around and have a massive garden, folks. I just don't. I think homesteading is full time. and I have other interests. You know what I'm saying? So for me, it's kind of a mixture. I think where we fall is a mixture of we're right there in between preserving and stacking. That's where I'm at, if I'm being honest. I think it's important to have food. Obviously, we don't want to starve. I think it's important to prolong the shelf life and to be able to preserve. But I also think it's important that I'm not dumping 12 hours a day, 7 days a week into it because I just don't enjoy it. But the next person might. The next person, their favorite hobby may be chasing chickens around. And that's awesome as long as they have a backup plan. Because again, homesteaders, I think, will be targeted first. And finally, the article goes on to say you need at least 1 year. That should be the goal. At least 1 year of food on hand. I think that's ambitious, but it is doable. I know it's doable because we're there already, but it is ambitious, especially if you're first starting out. And so if you are just starting out with the prepping, you don't have to jump off the cliff, so to speak, and within a week have a year's worth of food. That's not a realistic expectation unless you're just rich. I'm going to go ahead and say it. Unless you're rich. If you're rich, hey, order a year's worth of survival food or MREs and be done with it, right? But realistically, I would start with a couple of weeks. Make 2 weeks your first goal. It's about hitting uh, kind of checkpoints along the way. 2 weeks, then a month, and then, hey, can we hit 3 months? Can we hit 6 months? Can we hit 9 months? Then can we get up to a year? So it is doable. Just go in with realistic expectations. Understand you're going to spend money when it comes to prepping food, whether you're homesteading, whether you're stacking, whether you're preserving. You will have to spend money, but you can be smart and you can be creative and you can repurpose things and you can save a lot of money too. So anyway, thank you for listening here on a Friday. I appreciate it very, very much. And if you don't mind, shoot a thumbs up or down. I'm not going to discriminate, or shoot a thumbs down, whatever, on your way out the door. Take care and God bless.